Next up in the calendar is Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. So here is our F1 24 Jeddah car setup. The more time I spend with F1 24, the more I'm learning and rather enjoying the updated handling model. It is certainly true that a good car setup can really transform how these cars handle in race trim, and the current time trial meta does not lend itself to race setup. Jeddah is a tricky street track that is pretty high speed and requires a responsive car that can be thrown left and right, but will also be sticky enough at the rear to avoid having a 150-mile-an-hour crash. I've started this car setup with an aero of 20 and 17. You really have to lower the aero a lot compared to a time trial setup when heading into a race. 20 at the front and 17 at the rear is probably around the highest you'd really want to run your wings, unless it's raining, which is kind of unlikely in Jeddah. You can lower your front and rear by 1 or 2 points if you don't mind a slightly looser car, and that will certainly help with overtakes during a race. For the transmission, we can run a higher on-throttle diff compared to our Bahrain setup due to the high-speed nature of this track. Opt for 55%, then go 50% on the off-throttle diff. One of the bigger problems with the handling in this year's game is just how twitchy the front end of the car can be. So I found that intentionally dialing back some of that responsiveness can help with stability. Set the engine braking to 30. I really don't like running this too high, otherwise it just starts to introduce some weird off-throttle oversteer moments. I've gone a little bit less aggressive than I did with Bahrain with the front camber in this setup, with -3.1 and -1.6 at the rear. This is because Jeddah is a much more front limited track and it will stress your front tyres more than Bahrain did. For the toe, go with 0.1 and 0.12, with the higher rear toe helping with a bit of rear compliance. Once again, I've stiffened the front suspension and gone with a much softer rear. Opt for 36 at the front and just 10 at the rear. This makes for a really responsive car, which is crucial through those fast chicanes. For the ARBs, I've gone with 7 and 3, again prioritising the front more than the rear. Then set the ride height at 24 and 50. You can increase this a little bit if you find yourself being beached on some of the larger curbs, especially through the first sector. For me, this ride height configuration worked well, but if you ride up and over a curb by mistake, it can carry you offline, so bear that in mind. Now, my favourite brake setup for most tracks so far is 98% pressure and 54% bias. This is down to my own preference and braking style, but it works well for me and will probably be similar at most tracks. Finally, tyre pressures. The trick is to run your pressures as low as you can get away with without overheating your tyres. Increasing your pressures will lower temperatures this year, so increasing the pressure on the right side of the car will target the tyres more prone to overheating. Go 24.2 and 23.5 psi on the front, and 22.9 and 22.0 psi on the rear. And that will round out this Jeddah car setup for F1 24. This is a track which I'm enjoying more and more as each F1 game releases. It's a high risk circuit, but with this car setup, the car doesn't seem to have the same tendency to over-rotate as it can do at many tracks. Let me know your thoughts on this setup and my previous Bahrain setup, and hit that like button if you enjoyed this video and you're looking forward to the next setup. Now I'm off to Australia to start putting in some laps, and I'll see you in the next setup video.